Good morning. This is Policy Implications, right? Emerging Perspectives for Physical Education. We are on to Chapter 2. Before I jump in, I want to say a few things. One, I fully recorded this last night and I was unhappy with a few of the slides, so I'm recording over a few separate slides. So if at some points this seems a little disjointed, that's because part of it was recorded last night, part of it was recorded this morning. But my main thing is after I finished fully recording over this PowerPoint, I felt that I was rushing a little bit over some of these things. And that could be for a few reasons. One, because the next two chapters are much more policy and really perspective oriented. And, that's personally, I find that students don't really enjoy this material quite as much. So my goal is to keep these presentations relatively short, especially if the students don't really find this material that interesting. Now, hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully maybe you guys want to be someone who's instituting policies. But I'm recording again because I want to slow down and try to make this a little bit more interesting for each of you. I should also say that I still have had some issues with my camera on PowerPoint, which is why I still don't have any video. And because I don't have any video, we'll jump into the next slide. And yes, this is me. This is me, my daughter, and my wife. We were at Legoland right after some face painting, and my daughter is a ferocious lion. Now, I put this picture up mostly because I want you guys to know me. Several of you guys have me in some classes in person, but some of you guys don't, and I don't really know several of you, and I want you guys to feel free identifying me, and don't think of me as just a voice. Really think of me as your professor, someone that you could reach out to whenever you need, or if you're on campus, feel free to stop into a classroom, say hi, whatever it is. So, without further ado, let's move on. So, introduction. So we're talking about policy. Why is education policy important? Well, as graduates, right, you need to be competitive in a labor market. And in the 21st century, this can be a challenge. Some of the challenges, right, on why it can be difficult to get jobs in this labor market is because we have one, rapid globalization. No longer are you graduating from high school and simply working in your local town. Because of new technology, really, we live in this fully globalized world where you could be working with someone via Zoom that's across the country, right? Any time of the year. In addition to that, or in conjunction to that, is we have new innovations, constantly having new innovations. We need workers who are able to really get up to date very quickly with these new innovations. And then third is just a changing labor market. We could look at changes from being a more from being a more product oriented economy in the United States to being more of a service-oriented economy. So there's constantly changing labor markets as well. And as far as the United States go, that's talking a little bit more macro, and there's much more micro changing labor markets as well. So now talking about education. So this kind of poses some challenges that we need to shift our focus as educators, right? So one, we need to shift our focus where as educators we put learners at the center of our focus instead of putting ourselves first. In addition to that, we need to find innovative ways to leverage our technologies, right? The pandemic was the blessing in disguise in some ways, where there was some people really needed to figure out how they can utilize technology within the classroom. In addition, right, as students, you guys have this demand where you really need to be able to learn anytime and really anywhere. And the online learning place has been a good example of that, where you guys can watch these Edpuzzles really anytime you want, anywhere you want, and you still have the ability to take a class like this. And then lastly, a diverse range of institutions and organizations. I think because there's constantly new innovations, we really need to be fully integrated within other, what's the word I'm looking for? We need to be able to seek out help, right? It is impossible for an educator to be able to provide everything. So within an institution or organization, we have to have other educators who can come and help when need be. And all of this really adds up to a shift, right? We need to shift away from being test score oriented and being more performance oriented. And with this performance needs to focus on creativity and innovation. And if we focus on creativity and innovation, we can really start to address all of these problems that face physical education and a new graduate who has the ability to be creative and has the ability to address new innovations in a changing labor market. They're going to be much more marketable as a new hiree. So that was education, and we're still sticking with education as a whole. Sometimes we're not really just talking about physical education. So information, right? What we know is we have this nearly limitless access to information. And I can tell you right now, this access to information is only going to continue to expand. If you look at what I put here is Neuralink. If you're not familiar with Neuralink is a company that is run by Elon Musk. It's a non-for-profit right now, where essentially, in a nutshell, they are putting computer chips in your brain, where in the future you could potentially have direct access to the internet in your brain. So right now, the way you think of it is, we really have limitless access. We have our phones right next to us. At any point in time, we can Google the answer to really any question, right? Now, the time it takes to unlock your phone, to type in the words to Google, so on and so forth, that could be 30 seconds, right? Well, with Neuralink, we're really going to expedite that process where you just think of what you want and you can access it and get this information instantly. So my point is, we are going to continuously expand our ability to access this limitless information. So what this means is really the textbook learning model is obsolete, right? What we really need to do is help to teach critical thinking and help to build independent learners. It's interesting that the book talks about critical thinking and independent learners, mostly because part of my research philosophy is teaching all of you guys to be what I call self-directed learners. Taking my PhD at Seton Hall, I realized pretty quickly that the program itself was not the best program for my specific content area, where I wanted to learn about exercise physiology and exercise science. But what Seton Hall has taught me, and they've done a tremendous job of this, and I'll be forever thankful, is they've really given me the ability to be a self-directed learner. So there's certain contents where, or in the workplace, for instance, you are going to be given a task that you are completely unfamiliar with. And as a worker, you really need the ability to be able to address a given problem that you're unfamiliar with and problem solve. And this is going to be a skill in the future that is more and more important within the workplace. So that is our job as educators. Again, this isn't just physical education. As educators, our job is to really create self-directed learners. And in the past, knowledge has been the focus of learning in the K through 12 level. But this is really what we're talking about changing, is we can't just focus on knowledge, and that's why knowledge is bolded. So on this next slide, you'll see Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And if you've had me before, you know I bring this up in several of my classes. At the very foundational level of learning is knowledge, and simply put, knowledge is just recalling information. And as you go higher up the pyramid or the taxonomy, we go from knowledge to comprehension, where we understand what we recall, and then we are capable of applying it. Inevitably, we can analyze patterns and identify patterns, and then we can synthesize and eventually evaluate things. K through 12 learning classically focuses on knowledge, where you simply are taught something and you're supposed to memorize it. What we're arguing is that we need, even in the K through 12 levels, we need to focus more on the comprehension and the application components, perhaps even analysis. This is really what creates critical thinkers, self-directed learners. So that is what we're pushing for with these types of policy changes. Now, what are some things as a educator that you need to think about? Well, the technology is the future, because again, we're trying to incorporate technology into not just the physical education classroom, but any classroom. So this is what your textbook put forth in the near term, midterm, and far term. This is slightly outdated, but you could see the trends and they were pretty accurate, right? Well, within the near term, right, 12 months out, they talked about cloud computing and mobile technologies, right? Within the midterm, 2 to 3 years, we're talking about game-based learning and open content, and the far out is learning analytics and personal learning. And really what we need is we need technological competencies. We need, as educators, to teach people how to use cloud computing, game-based learning, so on and so forth. That should be the focus. Technological competencies. We have writing competencies, we have reading competencies, but do we have enough technological competencies in place that once someone graduates and goes out into the workforce or the real world, they are capable of really, like I said, being that self-directed learner? So now we're switching our focus a little bit to policy. So we really need a definition of policy and social policy. Social policy is really where education policy would fall under. And a working definition is really laws, administrative rules, and or guidelines which stem from a concern for human welfare. And that should seem to make sense. So what really is a source for policy formation? Usually it could be one of the three, it could be some overlapping of the three, but number one would be a crisis or national event. So the easiest one I could think of off the top of my head for policy change or formation is 9/11. Within air travel, there was sweeping policy change that led to much more security within airports, right? That was a crisis event that led to policy change. Other things, new knowledge or research. So again, I'm an exercise physiologist. In the 1950s and 60s, we did not have much research. I believe it was in the 1970s. A group called the ACSM released a position stand saying, hey, anabolic steroids don't really do anything. Again, in 1970, we didn't think anabolic steroids did anything. They didn't have any effect on performance, muscular hypertrophy, but at the time, our research was very limited. Fast forward, probably 1 to 2 decades later, we were able to gather much more research on anabolic steroids, and guess what? Policies changed, anabolic steroids were recognized as performance-enhancing drugs, and that led to policy change. Lastly, political events can also lead to policy change or policy formation. And the easiest example would be a new president, specifically a president that comes from a different viewpoint. So if we go from President Trump, a Democrat, to a Republican, or excuse me, President Trump, a Republican, to a Democrat, that can lead to definitely a change in policy formation. Now, steps for policy formation. So when you are forming policy, right, the previous slide was causes for policy change. Well, number one, we need a clear definition of the problem and the objectives we are going to use to really gauge success for our new policy. 2 is, what is our implementation plan? How are we going to implement this new policy? Is it going to be something that is gradual? Are we going to phase something out over a given period of time? So on and so forth. And number 3, we need to be able to evaluate the plan, right? Our assessment for success. Was our plan successful? Did it accomplish our objectives? What's an example of this? Objectives within a classroom are student learning outcomes. How do we evaluate the plan? Course evaluations at the end of a class. At the end of a class, you're supposed to evaluate me as the professor. And we do take a look at these. I sit down and I take a look at the course evals. Remember, they are anonymous. And based on your responses, I can modify the course to better suit, or at least to better address any problems you guys see in this course. All right, now we're on to framework for curriculum. This was put forth as central themes for the Global Forum for Physical Education Pedagogy Plan. Right, these were the central themes that popped up. So number 1, healthy, active lifestyles. So within physical education, now we're talking physical education, right? We want to move away from traditional sport skill models. In phys ed, it is much more common throughout the country that we teach sport skills like basketball, like baseball, softball, as opposed to teaching healthy active lifestyles that will inevitably carry people throughout their lives. The truth is, we are much less likely to participate in basketball in our 30s and 40s than we are to participate in a resistance training routine in our 30s and 40s. So we should start focusing on things like resistance training, nutrition, and leisure planning in physical education classrooms. 2, move to a student-centered learning model. We've talked about this. Instead of being teacher-centered, we must be student-centered and put the students' goals first, essentially individualizing some of our education content. How can we do this? Right? We should shoot for active learning rather than passive learning. So this lecture would be a form of passive learning. However, there is a nice mixture of active versus passive when you guys are asked to do given assignments, and things along those lines. Number 3, social justice, diversity, and safe learning. We must, another theme put forth was, we must be able to focus on persons with disabilities, less skilled learners, and disinterested learners. We can't simply work with the people we want to, right, or the people very interested in class. We have to create this safe learning environment for all persons within the classroom. Number 4, increasing accountability. So the NASP Standards in Physical Education wrote several things we need to do to increase accountability. Some of these things for physical educators are that they need to focus on competency of basic movements. They should know movement principles, right? They should value participation in the classroom. That kind of goes hand in hand with number 3. They should value physical activity for health. Right, so we can't just focus on physical activity for competition in sports, right? We need to also value physical activity for health. And then lastly, as part of increasing accountability, we really need to start to look at individual progress as being greater than national standards, right? Does a child in gym class improve pre to post, and how much did they improve pre to post as opposed to missing national standards? If somebody had a 15-20% improvement over a given time period, that is phenomenal improvement, let alone if they failed the national standard. So somebody can have a 20% improvement but still fail or be under 20th percentile within the national standards, but that 20% improvement pre to post is something that we need to start to value more as educators. I'm not really going to spend too much time on sources and consequences of obesity. You guys could really look at that or think of things for your assignment. Lack of physical activity, 150 and 225 minutes are the recommendations from NASPE for secondary education. Increased screen time, nutritional habits, all things that we can start focusing on within physical education curriculum. And we also need to start to recognize that there is a distinct de-emphasis of physical education within our policies. And that is something that really must be addressed. This could be decreased funding, it could be decreased exposure to students, but these are things, these 9 elements are things that we could look at as a framework for curriculum. All right. You have several things to do for your assignment this week. I don't think any of them are too challenging. But first, number 1, you are to speak to a higher up. So what is a higher up? Somebody who actually has some power over policies. And, this could be local policies. This could be regional policies. This could be state policies. Who knows? Maybe your uncle is friends with the governor, whatever it is. Find somebody. Some examples are the dean of certain schools, a principal of a school, a program chair. I myself, listen, I am a lowly assistant professor. I have very little say over policy. Now, what I want you to do is, again, you don't have to talk to them in person. You could shoot them an email, and really, this is all you're looking to do is you're going to ask them about a policy that was instituted at some point in which they faced resistance. Okay, and it doesn't have to be their policy. Really, it could be any policy, but a policy that they really inevitably had to enforce. What I want you to do is identify the key stakeholders for that policy. So what is a stakeholder? We didn't really discuss it, but it is identified in your text. A stakeholder is really anything or anyone that is affected by any type of change, in this case a policy change. So who was affected by this? And again, go beyond just like, oh, a policy in physical education is just the students. It's not just the students. It's the students. It could be the students' parents. It could be the physical educators where they have to stay in class longer. Really go beyond that. And then most importantly, ask the higher up, what were some of the tensions based around, right? So they faced resistance. Why did they face resistance? And that's pretty much it. I don't want you to take up a lot of these people's times. You ask them just a few questions. It's a relatively simple task. So an example of how you can do this is you ask somebody an example of a policy in which somebody might have faced resistance, and guess what? Every time a COVID-19 policy was instituted, there was plenty of resistance, whether that's masks in the classroom, whether it's vaccinations, whatever it is. That was a policy that was instituted at some point at various levels in various states. There was many stakeholders, little kids, adults, obviously teachers trying to enforce these things, right? And what were some of the tensions based around, right? Well, there's many, right? And obviously this is a real, I don't want to say a gray area, but it was something that was very polarizing, I should say. All right, so that's what I want you to do. And go ahead, go out, find somebody. Don't take up too much of their time. Next, what I want you to do is review the challenges facing physical education policy. So now we're looking specifically at physical education policy, right? And the challenges are listed here, numbers 1 through 4. We went over this earlier on in the presentation. What I want you to do is create your own policy, right? What is a change, right, that can be made in physical education to address some of the challenges in education, because remember, these were just challenges in education, or some of the challenges specifically for physical educators, like combating obesity, devaluing physical education, whatever it is. What is a policy that can be changed, right? And it doesn't have to be a crazy elaborate policy at the governmental level, right? This is a very vague question, and there's no right or wrong to this. Lastly, I never got to this last week, so I wanted to make sure I put it in this assignment. Last week we discussed the eye generation, right? What I want you to do is I want you in your phone to find out how much screen time you have per day, right? So to do that on the iPhone, I don't know about a Samsung, all you have to do is swipe down from the top, activate the searchlight feature, type in screen time, click on that, and you should get how much screen time you have per day. Put this on, this is all going to be submitted in the discussion board, right? Obviously, if you're uncomfortable with any of this, let me know. And that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Good luck. Enjoy your week.